The morning sun was already fierce over Camp Pendleton, California, and Rachel Torres had been picking up brass casings for nearly 2 hours. Her back ached as she bent down again and again, collecting the spent shell casings that littered the rifle range. The metal clinked as she dropped them into her bucket, a sound that had become the rhythm of her days. "Hey, Torres," a voice called out. "You missed some over by lane 7. Rachel looked up to see Corporal Jake Matthews pointing at the ground and grinning. He was standing with 2 other Marines, all of them in shooting gear, all of them looking at her like she was invisible. Or worse, like she was someone who didn't matter. "Got it," Rachel said quietly, heading toward lane 7 with her bucket. "Make sure you get every single one," Jake called after her. "We don't want the range officer writing us up because you can't do a simple job." The other Marines laughed. Rachel kept walking, her jaw tight. She'd learned over the past 6 months that responding only made things worse. Better to stay quiet, do the work, and get through each day. Rachel Torres was 32 years old, though most people at Camp Pendleton assumed she was much younger. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, wore no makeup, and did everything she could to blend into the background. She'd been assigned to range maintenance for half a year now, doing the jobs that nobody else wanted. Picking up brass, cleaning weapons, maintaining targets, sweeping out the ready room. It was a far cry from who she used to be. "Torres," Sergeant Lisa Chen approached, clipboard in hand. "When you're done with the brass, the armory needs cleaning, and the bathrooms in Building 6 need supplies." "Yes, Sergeant." Lisa's expression softened slightly. Unlike most of the others, she wasn't cruel to Rachel, just distant, professional. "You okay? You look tired." "I'm fine, Sergeant." "All right, take a water break when you need it. It's going to hit 95 today." "Thank you, Sergeant." Lisa walked away, and Rachel continued her work. The rifle range at Camp Pendleton was one of the busiest in the Marine Corps. Every day, dozens of Marines came through for qualification shoots, training exercises, and practice. And every day, Rachel cleaned up after them. She didn't mind the work itself. The physical labor kept her busy, kept her mind occupied. It was the looks she got that hurt, the whispers, the assumptions that she was either incompetent or being punished for something. Nobody knew the truth, and Rachel wanted to keep it that way. By mid-morning, the rifle range was packed. A sniper training course was in session, and Rachel knew to stay out of the way. She moved to the far end of the range, collecting brass from the previous day's session, trying to be invisible. The snipers were the elite. They moved with precision and confidence, their movements deliberate and controlled. Rachel watched them from the corner of her eye, remembering a time when she'd worked alongside men and women like this, when she'd been part of something important. "Eyes on your work, Torres," Jake said as he passed by. "Stop staring at your betters." Rachel's hands clenched around the brass bucket, but she said nothing. Jake laughed and continued toward the sniper course, where he was apparently serving as a support role. The morning wore on. Rachel's bucket filled with brass casings, hundreds of them all needing to be sorted and recycled. Her knees hurt from kneeling on the hard ground. Her shoulders burned from the repetitive motion. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her. "Need a hand?" Rachel looked up, squinting against the sun. A man stood above her, tall and lean, wearing sniper gear. His face was weathered with sharp gray eyes that seemed to see everything. The name tape on his uniform read SULLIVAN. On his collar were the chevrons of a gunnery sergeant. "No thank you, Gunny," Rachel said. "I've got it." "Looks like a lot for one person." Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan crouched down, studying her face. "You're Torres, right? Range maintenance." "Yes, Gunny." "How long you been doing this?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably. 6 months, Gunny." "That's a long time for range detail. You waiting for a new assignment?" "Something like that." Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Rachel kept her gaze down, focusing on the brass casings. She didn't want attention, especially not from a senior NCO. "Well, don't let me interrupt your work," Sullivan said, standing. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he continued to watch her, and Rachel felt the weight of his scrutiny. She reached for another handful of brass, and as she did, the long-sleeved shirt she always wore slid up her left wrist slightly. It was only for a second, but it was enough. "Hold on," Sullivan said sharply. "Your wrist, let me see it." Rachel's heart stopped. She quickly pulled her sleeve down. It's nothing, Gunny. That wasn't nothing. I saw a patch, a medical patch. Sullivan's voice had changed, become more urgent. Show me your wrist, that's not a request. Rachel's hands trembled. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid for 6 months. She slowly stood, facing the gunnery sergeant, her mind racing for an excuse, an explanation, anything. Gunny, I really need to get back to work. Your wrist tores now. There was no getting around it. With shaking hands, Rachel pulled up her left sleeve, revealing the medical patch taped to her inner wrist. But it wasn't just any patch. It was specialized, about 2 inches square, with a distinctive blue border and a serial number printed on it. Sullivan's face went pale. Jesus Christ, he whispered. That's a nerve graft patch from the VA program. Those are only given to... He stopped, his eyes widening as he looked at Rachel with new understanding. You were at Kandahar, the field hospital, the attack in 2019. Rachel said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. You're not just some Marine doing range detail, Sullivan said. You were a combat medic, one of the ones who... He ran his hand through his short hair, clearly shaken. How the hell are you here picking up brass? Please, Gunny, Rachel said quietly. Don't. What? Don't ask questions. Don't wonder why a decorated combat medic is being treated like a screw-up. Sullivan's voice rose. Do you know what you people did that day? Do you know how many lives you saved? Rachel pulled her sleeve back down, her eyes burning. I know what happened that day better than anyone, Gunny, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get back to work. This is wrong, Sullivan said. Whatever happened, whatever brought you here, this is wrong. Before Rachel could respond, Jake Matthews called out from across the range. Gunny Sullivan, we're ready for the next exercise when you are. Sullivan glanced toward the sniper course, then back at Rachel. We're not done talking about this. Yes, Gunny, we are, Rachel said firmly. Please, just forget what you saw. I can't do that. Then I'm asking you as a favor, let it go. I'm fine where I am. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. For now, but Tors, whatever you're running from, you can't hide forever. Sooner or later, the truth comes out. He walked away, leaving Rachel standing alone with her bucket of brass, and the sick feeling in her stomach that her carefully constructed anonymity was starting to crumble. She returned to work, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The nerve graft patch on her wrist seemed to burn beneath her sleeve, a permanent reminder of a day she'd spent 4 years trying to forget. A day when she'd been someone completely different. A day when she'd been a hero. And a day that had cost her everything. As Rachel bent to collect more brass casings, she felt eyes on her. She looked up and saw Sullivan in the distance, watching her even as he instructed his students. His expression was troubled, curious, and determined. Rachel knew that look. She'd seen it before in people who didn't give up easily. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, that her secrets were about to be exposed, whether she wanted them to be or not. The day stretched ahead of her, hot and endless. Rachel filled bucket after bucket with brass, trying to lose herself in the mindless work. But for the first time in 6 months, the work wasn't enough to quiet her mind. Because Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan had recognized the patch, and that meant he knew exactly what she'd survived, what she'd done, what she'd lost. And that meant everything was about to change. As the afternoon sun beat down on the rifle range, Rachel Tors picked up another brass casing and dropped it in her bucket, wondering how much longer she could run from her past. Wondering if it was finally time to stop running. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the rifle range before sunrise, hopping to get her work done before the sniper course started. But when she unlocked the equipment shed, she found Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan already there, sitting on a bench, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Morning Tors, he said. Figured you'd show up early, black coffee okay. Rachel hesitated in the doorway. Gunny, I really don't want to. It's just coffee and conversation, nothing official. Sullivan held out one of the cups. Please, 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, Rachel stepped inside and accepted the coffee. It was still hot, and she wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth in the cool morning air. Thank you, Gunny. Sullivan took a sip of his own coffee, then set it down. I couldn't sleep last night, kept thinking about that patch on your wrist, kept trying to remember everything I knew about the Kandahar hospital attack. Gunny, 23 casualties came in during a coordinated attack on the base, Sullivan continued, his voice quiet but firm. The field hospital took a direct hit. 3 medics died instantly. The rest of the medical staff were trapped, wounded, or both. But 4 people kept working, kept doing surgery, kept treating patients even as the building was falling down around them. They saved 18 lives that day, 18 people who should have died. Rachel stared into her coffee, her throat tight. The Navy Cross was awarded to 3 of those medics, Sullivan said. But the 4th one refused it, refused the medal, refused the promotion, refused all the attention, just disappeared into the system. He leaned forward. That was you, wasn't it? Rachel's hands trembled. She set the coffee down before she spilled it. Why does it matter? That was 4 years ago. It matters because one of those 18 people was my younger brother. Sullivan's voice cracked slightly. Lance Corporal David Sullivan. He took shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. The doctors said if he'd waited another 10 minutes for treatment, he'd have bled out. But he didn't wait because a combat medic operated on him in the middle of a collapsing building while enemy mortars were still falling. Rachel closed her eyes. She remembered that day in pieces, fragments of memory that came to her in nightmares. The smoke, the screams, the blood, so much blood. David's alive because of you, Sullivan said. He's married now, has a little girl. They named her Grace. He pulled out his phone and showed Rachel a photo of a young Marine in dress blues standing next to a woman holding a baby. That's what you gave him, a life, a family, a future. I was just doing my job, Rachel whispered. No, you were doing something extraordinary. Sullivan put his phone away. So I need to understand why you're here picking up brass, being treated like you don't matter. What happened, Tors? Rachel was silent for a long moment. Part of her wanted to tell him to mind his own business, to leave her alone. But another part of her, a part she'd been suppressing for years, wanted to tell someone, wanted to share the weight she'd been carrying. I got hurt that day too, she finally said. Not from the mortars, from... She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the nerve graft patch. We were working on a patient, a young Marine, maybe 19. The ceiling collapsed. A piece of rebar came down, went through my wrist, severed the nerves. Sullivan winced. The Navy doctors did what they could, but the damage was extensive. They used an experimental nerve graft procedure. This patch delivers medication directly to the repair site. Rachel stared at the small blue square on her wrist. It worked mostly. I have about 70% function, but 70% isn't enough to be a combat medic, isn't enough to be trusted with lives. That's why you left the medical field. I didn't leave. I was declared unfit for medical duties. They offered me other positions, administrative work, teaching, logistics, but I couldn't. Her voice broke. I couldn't be around it anymore. The hospitals, the patients, the constant reminder of what I used to be able to do. So you requested the lowest profile assignment you could find. I requested to be somewhere nobody would know me, somewhere I could just be another Marine doing simple work. Rachel pulled her sleeve back down. For 6 months it worked, until you noticed the patch. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. What about the young Marine, the one you were treating when you got hurt? Rachel's face crumpled. He didn't make it. I was holding pressure on his femoral artery when the ceiling came down. When the rebar went through my wrist, I lost my grip. He bled out before anyone else could get to him. She wiped her eyes roughly. His name was Private First Class Marcus Webb. He was 19 years old. He wanted to be a teacher. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? If I'd been stronger, if I'd held on despite the pain. You'd have bled out yourself, Sullivan said firmly. Tors, I've read the after-action reports. I looked them up last night. You know what they said about Private Webb? That his injuries were catastrophic, that he had a 5% chance of survival even with immediate evacuation to a surgical center. You gave him every chance possible. It wasn't enough. It never feels like enough. That's the curse of being a medic. You remember every person you couldn't save and forget all the ones you did. Sullivan stood and walked to the window of the shed. My brother told me about that day. He said he could hear the medic working on him, talking to him, telling him he was going to be okay, telling him to hold on. Even when the building was shaking apart, even when everyone else was running, that medic stayed. Was that you? Rachel nodded, unable to speak. David said that voice kept him alive, gave him something to hold on to when everything hurt and he wanted to give up. Sullivan turned back to face her. You saved 18 people, Tors. 18 families got their loved ones back, and you're punishing yourself for the one you couldn't save. I can't be a medic anymore, my hand. So be something else, but not this. Not hiding, not wasting what you are. Sullivan's voice was passionate now. You know what I do? I train snipers. I teach them to save lives by taking shots that matter, by protecting their units, by being smart and skilled and dedicated. You could teach too. You could train the next generation of combat medics. You could make sure they're prepared for days like Kandahar. I can't not. Because I'm afraid. Rachel's voice rose, surprising them both. I'm afraid that if I get close to it again, if I'm around medicine and patients and life-or-death situations, I'll freeze. I'll remember Marcus Webb bleeding out while I couldn't hold pressure. I'll remember the medics who died when that first mortar hit. I'll remember. She stopped, breathing hard. I'll remember that I'm broken now, that I'm not who I used to be. Sullivan crossed the shed and put his hand on her shoulder. You're not broken, you're wounded. There's a difference, and wounds can heal if you let them. The Navy already decided I'm not fit for medical duties. The Navy declared you unfit for combat medical duties because of your physical limitation. But there are other ways to serve in medicine: teaching, training, research, protocol development. Sullivan squeezed her shoulder gently. Tors, I'm working with the Medical Training Command on a new program. They're developing advanced combat casualty care courses for Marines deploying to hostile areas. They need instructors with real experience, people who have been there, who know what it's really like. I can't. You can, and before you say no, just think about it. Come observe one of my classes today. See what we do. No commitment, no pressure, just see. Rachel wanted to refuse, wanted to run back to her comfortable, safe routine of picking up brass and being invisible. But something in Sullivan's eyes, belief, hope, determination, made her pause. One class, she said quietly, that's all. That's all I'm asking. 3 hours later, Rachel stood at the back of a classroom, watching Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan teach a group of young Marines about tactical combat casualty care. The students were attentive, taking notes, asking questions. The golden hour isn't really an hour anymore, Sullivan was saying. In modern combat, you've got minutes to make decisions that will save or cost a life. Your job isn't to be a doctor, it's to keep your buddy alive long enough to get to a doctor. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Gunny, what if you freeze? What if you're in the moment and you can't remember your training? Sullivan glanced at Rachel before answering. Then you focus on one thing at a time. One breath, one action, one decision. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present and do the next right thing. The class continued, covering tourniquets, pressure dressings, airway management. Rachel found herself mentally going through each procedure, her hands moving unconsciously as she remembered the muscle memory she'd developed over years of training. When the class ended, several students approached Sullivan with additional questions. Rachel noticed they treated him with respect and genuine interest. This wasn't just another required course to them. They understood it might save their lives or the lives of their friends. After the students left, Sullivan walked over to Rachel. What did you think? They're engaged, that's good. They're scared, Sullivan corrected. Most of them are deploying in 3 months. They know this isn't theoretical. He gestured to the training mannequins and medical supplies scattered around the room. We do the best we can with what we have, but I'm not a medic. I can teach them the basics, but I can't teach them what you know. The real-world experience, the judgment calls, the how it actually feels part. Rachel walked over to one of the training stations. The mannequin had a simulated leg wound. The students had applied a tourniquet, but it was too loose and positioned incorrectly. She knelt down and adjusted it without thinking, her damaged hand working alongside her good one. 70% function was more than enough for this. See, Sullivan said quietly, you still have it. Teaching a class isn't the same as... No, it's not, but it matters just as much. Sullivan pulled out a folder from his desk. I took the liberty of contacting the Medical Training Command. They're very interested in talking to you. They've reviewed your record and they want to offer you an interview. Rachel took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was information about the Combat Casualty Care School, instructor positions, and a letter from a Colonel Martinez requesting a meeting. You had no right. I had every right. I'm looking at a decorated combat veteran with skills and experience we desperately need, and she's picking up brass casings because she thinks she's not good enough anymore. Sullivan's voice softened. Tors, my brother is alive because you didn't give up on him when things got hard. Don't give up on yourself now. Rachel stared at the folder, emotions warring inside her. Fear, hope, anger, longing, they all mixed together until she couldn't tell which was which. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. You don't have to know, you just have to try. Before Rachel could respond, the classroom door opened and Corporal Jake Matthews walked in, followed by Sergeant Chen. "There you are, Tors," Jake said with his usual smirk. "The range is trashed from yesterday. Those brass casings won't pick themselves up." Sullivan turned to face Jake, his expression cold. "Corporal Matthews, I believe you're interrupting a private conversation." Jake's smirk faded slightly. "Sorry, Gunny, just doing my job. Tors is assigned to range maintenance and—" "Not anymore," Sullivan said. "As of today, Tors is reassigned to my training program. You'll need to find someone else to pick up your brass." Rachel's head snapped up. "Gunny, you can't just—" "I already cleared it with the range officer and the training command co. Your reassignment is effective immediately." Sullivan handed her a set of papers. "Welcome to the Combat Casualty Care Instruction Team, Tors. We start at 0600 tomorrow." Sergeant Chen's eyes widened. "Combat Casualty Care? Tors, you're a medic." Rachel said quietly. "I was a medic." "She's being modest," Sullivan said. "She's a Navy Cross recipient and one of the most experienced combat medics in the Marine Corps, and she's going to help us train the next generation." Jake's face had gone from smug to shocked. "Wait, you're telling me that Tors, the same Tors who's been cleaning the range for 6 months, is some kind of war hero?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Sullivan's voice was hard. "Which makes me wonder why she's been treated like a servant instead of the senior NCO she is. Care to explain that, Corporal?" Jake's mouth opened and closed. I didn't know, nobody told us, she never said." "She shouldn't have had to say. You should have treated her with respect regardless of her background." Sullivan dismissed them with a wave. "That's all, you're dismissed." Sergeant Chen left quickly, but Jake lingered for a moment, looking at Rachel with a mix of shame and confusion. Then he too left, closing the door behind him. Rachel stood in the empty classroom, holding the papers, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said. "Nobody's ever ready," Sullivan replied. "But you're capable, and that's what matters." As Rachel looked down at the reassignment papers, she felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be more than her worst day. That night, Rachel sat in her small quarters staring at the files Sullivan had given her. Inside were details about the Combat Casualty Care School, course outlines, and instructor requirements. Also inside was a copy of her own service record, the complete version, not the abbreviated one she'd been hiding behind. Navy Cross for Extraordinary Heroism in Combat, 3 Purple Hearts, Combat Action Ribbon, letters of commendation from officers she'd served under, citations from missions she'd nearly forgotten about, medical innovations she'd developed in the field that had been adopted into standard protocols. She barely recognized the Marine described in these pages. There was a knock at her door. Rachel quickly closed the file and stood. "Come in." Sergeant Lisa Chen entered, her expression uncertain. "Got a minute, Tors? Or should I call you Petty Officer Tors now?" Rachel winced. "Just Rachel is fine, we're off duty." "Rachel, then." Lisa sat down in the room's only chair. "I owe you an apology, a big one." "You don't." "Yes, I do. For 6 months, I've watched you do grunt work without complaint. I thought you were either running from something or being punished for something. Either way, I kept my distance because I didn't want to get involved." Lisa's eyes were bright with emotion. "I never imagined you were running from being a hero." "I'm not a hero. The Navy Cross says different. So does Gunny Sullivan. So does his brother, who I spoke to on the phone an hour ago." Lisa leaned forward. "David Sullivan told me what you did that day at Kandahar. He said you operated on him for 45 minutes while the building was literally falling apart. Said you kept talking to him, kept him conscious, kept him fighting." Rachel's throat tightened. "He survived, that's what matters." 18 people survived, because of you and 3 other medics who refused to quit." Lisa pulled out her phone and showed Rachel a news article from 2019. The headline read, "Heroes of Kandahar, medics save lives during hospital attack." Rachel had never read the articles. She'd avoided all media coverage after the attack. "They interviewed some of the survivors," Lisa said. "Want to hear what they said about you?" "No." She was covered in blood, her own and everyone else's, but she never stopped working. She moved like she had all the time in the world, even though we all knew we might die any second. "That's from a lance corporal you treated for a sucking chest wound." Lisa scrolled down. The building was shaking, dust was falling from the ceiling, and this medic looks at me and says, "You're not dying today, Marine. I won't allow it." And somehow I believed her. That was from a sergeant with a severed artery.